"Your mother's house is a filthy dump." Those were the words my daughter-in-law screamed in front of her wealthy friends, right in the middle of my own living room. My name is Gladys, and for years they saw me as just a quiet widow, living in a house they were ashamed of. What they didn't know was that the filthy dump they just insulted was a $5 million architectural masterpiece, and they had just given me the perfect reason to sell it. Have you ever been pushed to your absolute limit by the very people you're supposed to trust? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. The quiet of the Saturday morning in my kitchen, rich with the smell of freshly ground coffee and the faint, clean scent of the old-growth oak that formed the bones of my home, was a sweet lie. I stood at the counter, watching the hummingbirds, tiny iridescent jewels, flit and battle around the feeder just outside the vast expanse of the kitchen window. This ritual, the coffee, the birds, the gentle morning light filtering through the canopy of live oaks in the backyard, was my sanctuary. It was a piece I had painstakingly built for myself in the 10 years since David had been gone. But I knew, with the certainty of a mother who knows her child's every inflection, that this peace wouldn't last. The ring of the telephone from Leo, my son, was always the herald of a coming storm. I ran my hand over the impossibly smooth surface of the teak dining table that David had sanded and finished himself, a project that had taken him an entire winter 4 decades ago. His knuckles had been raw, his hands perpetually smelling of tongue oil. But his eyes had shone with a creator's joy. He always used to say, his voice a low and warm memory that I could summon on command, "Gladys, don't ever let anyone else tell you the value of the things you love." His words, once a simple expression of his philosophy, had never echoed so strongly in my mind as they did right then. A quiet warning against a world that only measured worth in dollars. The phone rang a second time, a shrill, insistent sound that shattered the morning's harmony. With a sigh that carried the weight of 1,000 similar conversations, I picked it up. "Mom, hey, listen, are you busy tonight?" Leo's voice was strained, stretched thin over a wire of anxiety. It was the voice he used when Isabella wanted something, the one that pleaded for my compliance before he even made the request. "Not especially, honey. I was just planning a quiet evening." "Why?" He cleared his throat. "Well, Isabella was thinking, actually, her parents are in town, and we were wondering if we could all come over for dinner. An important family dinner, you know?" An important family dinner. My heart sank like a stone. With Isabella, that phrase was code. It meant a performance was required. An inspection was imminent. "Of course, dear," I said, my voice a careful construction of maternal warmth, betraying none of the sudden, bone-deep weariness I felt. "That sounds lovely. What time should I expect you?" "Around 7. "Great. Thanks, Mom. See you then. Love you." He hung up before I could reply, the click of the disconnect leaving a profound silence in its wake. The hummingbirds were gone. The sweet lie of the morning had ended. For the rest of the day, a heavy cloud settled over me as I moved through the house. I began preparing dinner, the familiar motions of chopping vegetables for a salad and slowly braising a pot roast, doing little to soothe my nerves. I was cooking for people who would find fault in every bite. I moved through the rooms, my house, and every object screamed with memories of David. The built-in walnut shelving he had designed, each shelf perfectly spaced to hold our collection of art books, and the lopsided pottery Leo had made in grade school. The massive flagstone fireplace we had built together one grueling summer, stone by stone. The way the entire back wall of the living room was glass, blurring the line between the inside and the wild, rambling garden he had so loved. This house wasn't just wood and stone, it was the blueprint of our life together. It was simple, honest, and it was ours. It was everything Isabella was not. As the afternoon sun slanted low through the sycamore trees, casting long, dancing shadows across the living room floor, I found myself polishing the large picture window that looked out onto the front yard. I was trying to wipe away the smudges, trying to make everything perfect for a woman who would never, could never, see its perfection. It was then, in the reflection on the clean glass, that I saw it. A gleaming black Mercedes, silent and predatory, pulled into my driveway. My watch read 5:55. They were an hour early. The game had begun. The click-clack of Isabella's stilettos on my slate entryway sounded like a countdown to an execution. Each sharp tap echoed in the vaulted space of the living room. A sound so alien in this house of soft rugs and quiet reverence. I forced a smile as Leo ushered them in. Isabella, looking as if she had stepped from the pages of a fashion magazine in a severe white dress, and her parents, Richard and Margaret Reynolds, whose competing expensive colognes filled the air and choked out the familiar, comforting scent of my slow-cooking pot roast. As Isabella greeted me with an air kiss that landed a full inch from my cheek, I was thrown back to the first time Leo had brought her home. She had surveyed the hand-carved beams and the expansive glass walls with a slight, almost imperceptible frown. "Was your father just a regular architect?" she had asked, the word regular dripping with a condescension she didn't bother to hide. I had let it pass then, a mother's desperate hope overriding her instincts. "Oh, Gladys, your home is so unique," Margaret said now, her eyes scanning the room, lingering for a moment too long on the worn spot on my favorite armchair, the one David and I had shared for 30 years. Isabella joined in, her voice a saccharine melody. "It has such character, Mom, so much history." Their words were meant to be knives wrapped in silk. They walked through the open living space, their heads tilted in a pantomime of appreciation, while their eyes catalogued every sign of a life lived rather than a life curated. The dinner was an agonizing performance. They spoke of a recent ski trip to Aspen and a charity gala in Beverly Hills where they had bid on a diamond necklace. Richard complained about the difficulty of docking their new 50-foot yacht in Newport. They were painting a world of effortless luxury, a world of glittering surfaces designed to make me feel small and provincial. I sat at the head of the teak table David had built, feeling like a stranger, a museum keeper in my own life. Leo, my poor, spineless Leo, tried weakly to bridge the chasm. "Mom's pot roast is amazing, isn't it?" he would interject, only to be ignored as Isabella launched into a breathless story about a Michelin-starred restaurant in Paris. I watched my son, a ghost at his own table, shrinking under his wife's glittering dominance. After dinner, as we sat with coffee in the living room, the football game on the television, a muted, masculine murmur in the background, Isabella let out an exaggerated sigh. "It's just impossible to have people over here, Leo. The parking is a nightmare. My friends would have to park halfway down the hill." She looked around the living room, her eyes narrowed in calculation. "You know, if we just knocked out this wall, opened up the space, we could really entertain properly. A proper upgrade is all it needs." Richard, her father, ever the opportunist, seized the opening. "Speaking of the future, Gladys," he said, his tone casual but his eyes sharp and focused on me. "What are your long-term plans for this property?" Before I could formulate an answer, Isabella slammed her coffee cup down, the fine porcelain cracking against the saucer. "Honestly, it's an embarrassment. Your mother's house is a filthy dump," she burst out, her voice shrill with a sudden vicious frustration. "We have to do something about it, Leo." The room fell into a stark, humming silence. All I could hear was the frantic beat of my own heart in my ears. The air was thick with my public humiliation. Leo stared down at his hands, his face flushed with a shame, so profound he couldn't bring himself to look at me. After they left, their departure a rushed and awkward affair that left a mess of plates and a toxic atmosphere in its wake. I began clearing the table. My hands were shaking. That's when I saw it. In his haste to flee the scene of my disgrace, Leo had left his briefcase by the door. I picked it up, intending to call him, but the clasp was undone. Spilling out was a sleek, professionally bound file folder, its label facing up, the words stark and brutal under the lamplight. Property appraisal. Preliminary report. The appraisal report felt like a block of ice in my hands, but not as cold as the emptiness that had taken root in my chest. $450,000. The number was a calculated insult, a figure so low it could only have been meant to wound, to make me feel as small and insignificant as they clearly believed I was. I stood there in the wreckage of my dining room, the ghost of their laughter still hanging in the air like a bitter perfume. My eyes drifted to David's study, to the old, worn leather box on the bookshelf that he'd made me promise years ago never to throw away. A dusty, forgotten relic from a life that felt 1,000,000 miles away. They came back 3 days later, on a Tuesday afternoon that was gray and unforgiving. The date was October 7th, 2025. Leo used the forgotten briefcase as his excuse, but Isabella marched in behind him with the purposeful stride of a general returning to the battlefield, her face a mask of cold resolve. "We need to talk, Gladys," she said, dispensing with any pleasantries. She didn't call me Mom. Leo hovered by the door, his guilt a palpable thing in the room, making the air thick and hard to breathe. "Isabella, maybe we should ease into this." "Ease into what?" she snapped, turning on him with a flash of irritation. "We're here to help her, Leo. It's time for some honesty." She turned back to me, her smile sharp and predatory. She pulled the appraisal from her purse and laid it on the teak table, the cheap paper a sacrilege on the hand-finished wood. "As you can see, the house isn't worth what you might think. It's old. It needs work." Then she produced a glossy brochure, its cover showing smiling, silver-haired seniors playing shuffleboard in a sun-drenched courtyard. "But we've found the best solution for you," she cooed, sliding it across the table toward me. "The Willow Creek Estates. It's a wonderful senior community. All your meals, medical care on site. You wouldn't have to worry about a single thing." I stared at the brochure, at the manufactured smiles and the sterile-looking environment, then at her. They weren't just trying to take my house. They were trying to erase my life, to pack me away in a neat, convenient box. Before I could speak, she produced another set of papers, bound in a neat legal folder. "And this is just a simple family agreement," she said breezily, as if she were discussing the weather. "It gives us permission to manage the property, to handle the renovations and the eventual sale. Just a formality to make everything easier for you." Leo finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper, his eyes fixed on a spot on the floor just past my shoulder. "Mom, it makes sense. We can take care of everything for you." Something inside me, something that had been bruised and battered and was ready to break, finally hardened into steel. I pushed the papers back across the table, my hand steady. "No." The word hung in the air, simple and absolute. Isabella's mask of concern dropped, revealing the raw, ugly ambition beneath. "No? What do you mean, no?" "I mean, I will not be signing anything. I will not be moving to Willow Creek, and I will not be selling my home." Her eyes narrowed into slits of fury, her perfectly made-up face twisting into a sneer. "You can't selfishly keep this house forever," she hissed, her voice rising with a venom that made Leo flinch. "It's a falling-down relic. If you don't cooperate, we'll have to take legal measures." After they stormed out, the threat hanging heavy in the silent house, I walked on unsteady legs into David's study. My gaze fell on the old leather box on his bookshelf, a silent sentinel from the past. "David, what do I do?" I whispered to the empty room, with a resolve that came from a place of deep, cornered desperation. I reached up and pulled it down. It was time to open it. A fine layer of dust coated the leather box, a testament to the years it had sat untouched, a silent promise from a life that was now just a memory. As I wiped the surface with the sleeve of my cardigan, my fingers trembled. The brass latches, tarnished with age, clicked open with a sound that seemed to echo in the profound, lonely silence of David's study. As I lifted the lid, the scent of old paper, cedar, and a lifetime of memories rushed out, carrying with it a secret that was about to change everything. Inside were not loose papers, but several tightly wound scrolls of heavy, cream-colored parchment, tied with faded silk ribbons. My hands shook as I untied the first one and carefully unrolled it on his wide, empty drafting table. It was a blueprint, but it was more than that. It was a piece of art. The lines were drawn not with the cold precision of a computer, but with the fluid grace of a master's hand. There were intricate notes penciled in the margins, observations on the interplay of light and shadow at different times of day, detailed cross-sections of the custom-joined timbers, and lyrical sketches of the very room I was standing in. It was the soul of our home, rendered in ink on paper. At the bottom right corner of the vellum were two signatures. One was David's, familiar and beloved, a gentle and looping script. The other was a sharp, angular scrawl I didn't recognize, Arthur Vance. I unrolled the other scrolls, each one a different elevation or a detail of the house, each a masterpiece of design. Tucked at the bottom of the box, beneath the last scroll, was a thick bundle of letters held together by a simple, brittle rubber band. They were dated from the early 1970s. The first was from this Arthur Vance, a name that was beginning to feel heavy with significance. David, it read. The ink faded, but the words clear. Our singular project is a pact between us and the land itself. It must remain a pure legacy, untainted by commerce or vanity. David's reply, written on a thin carbon copy, was full of a humility and awe I recognized so well. I will be its custodian, not just its owner. I will honor the integrity of your vision for as long as I live. As I sifted through the letters, a small, simple cream cardstock slip fell out onto the desk. It was embossed with a single name and a title, Benjamin Carter, Heritage and Art Law. With a sudden, powerful premonition, I moved to the old laptop on David's desk. It whirred to life slowly. My fingers, clumsy with a strange mix of dread and hope, typed the name Arthur Vance into the search bar. The results flooded the screen. Article after article appeared, their headlines like thunderclaps in the quiet room. Arthur Vance, the reclusive genius of American architecture, master of mid-century modern, the man who vanished. The lost designs, the holy grail of the architectural world. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the pictures of his other known works, museums, famous private estates, and saw the same clean lines, the same seamless integration with nature, the same soul that lived within my own walls. I was not living in a dump. I was living in a work of art, a lost masterpiece. My hand, now steady, reached for the phone. I looked at the simple business card and dialed the number. A crisp, professional voice answered on the second ring. Carter Law Offices. How may I direct your call? I've been waiting for your call for 10 years. Mrs. Miller. Benjamin Carter's voice on the phone was calm, unsurprised, as if my desperate late-night call was an appointment he had long expected. The next day, Wednesday, October 8th, 2025, I drove into downtown Los Angeles, my old sedan feeling like a dinghy in a sea of gleaming luxury vessels. The towering glass and steel structures felt like a different universe from my quiet, tree-lined street in Pasadena, a world of sharp angles and cold, hard power. It was a world I had long avoided, but now I was marching directly into its heart. Carter's office was on the 32nd floor of a discreet, elegant building, the kind with a hushed lobby and an express elevator that made your ears pop. The air inside was cool and smelled of leather and old books, a sanctuary of quiet competence. "Gladys Miller," I told the receptionist, my voice a nervous whisper that felt out of place. "I have an appointment with Mr. Carter." He was waiting for me. He was a man in his late 60s, with a full head of silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through the fearful facade I was wearing. He greeted me not with a handshake, but with a warm, steady hand on my shoulder. "Gladys, it's been too long. Come in." He led me to a vast corner office with a panoramic view of the city. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Show me what you found." I laid the blueprints and the bundle of letters on his vast mahogany desk. My hands trembled as I recounted the entire sordid story: the dinner, the insults, the fraudulent appraisal for $450,000, the brochure for the senior home, the threat of legal action from my own son. My voice, which had been so weak in my own home, found a new strength here, fueled by the indignation I was finally allowing myself to feel. He listened without interruption, his expression unchanging, a mask of professional composure, but I saw the tightening of his jaw when I repeated Isabella's words. "A filthy dump." When I finished, he finally looked up from the documents he had been examining with a reverence that immediately calmed me. "Your husband, David," he began, his voice soft but firm, "was the only student Arthur Vance ever took on. After Vance went into seclusion in the 1960s, he designed only one more residential structure. He never built it himself. He entrusted the blueprints and its execution to one man, the only one he trusted to honor his vision. Your husband." He gestured to the papers on his desk. "This house is not a property, Gladys. It's an architectural holy grail. There is a very small, very wealthy community of collectors and architectural firms who have been searching for this lost Vance for decades." My heart was hammering against my ribs. "What is it really worth, Benjamin?" He leaned back in his leather chair, a faint, sad smile on his lips. $5 million is a starting point, Mrs. Miller. To the right buyer, someone who understands they are acquiring not just real estate, but a piece of history, it could be much more, and I know exactly who the right buyers are." He then laid out a plan, not for a public sale that would take months, but a private, discreet auction among a curated list of clients who would jump at the chance. A wave of dizziness washed over me. I gripped the arms of the leather chair to steady myself. Benjamin leaned forward, his professional demeanor softening into something warmer, something personal. "David foresaw this," he said gently. "He wasn't just a client, he was my dearest friend. He came to see me a month before he passed. He left me with very specific instructions, to act only when you truly needed it. He said, 'Ben, Gladys is strong, but she's too kind. There might come a day when Leo's ambition, or the ambition of someone close to him, makes him forget who he is. Protect her when that day comes.'" He paused, his eyes locking with mine, and the full weight of his loyalty became clear. And his instructions were not just to sell it. He told me to make sure that if they ever forced your hand, they would pay a price for it. "Now," Benjamin said, his voice shifting back to the sharp strategist, his eyes now holding a glint of steel, "here is what you are going to do. You will play their game. You will call your son. You will seem to consider their offer. You will be the confused, vulnerable widow they believe you to be. You will let them believe they are winning." I took a deep, steadying breath, summoning every ounce of the frail, defeated old woman they believed me to be, and dialed Leo's number. My voice, when I spoke, trembled on purpose, a pathetic, reedy sound that I barely recognized as my own. "Leo," I began, letting it crack just so on his name. "Honey, I think we need to talk about your offer." The silence on the other end of the line was thick with his surprise, followed by a rush of relieved words that tumbled out of him. "Mom, yes, of course, that's great. We'll be right there. Don't you worry about a thing." They arrived less than an hour later, Isabella sweeping in like a conqueror returning to a newly won territory, her smile wide and victorious. Leo trailed behind her, unable to meet my eye, shuffling his feet on the flagstone floor like a guilty schoolboy being led to the principal's office. They brought the papers again, spreading them on the teak table like a treaty of surrender. My surrender. "We knew you'd see reason," Isabella said, her voice dripping with a false, cloying sympathy that made my skin crawl. She tapped a perfectly manicured finger on the fraudulent appraisal. $450,000 is a very generous price for a place this dated. With that, you can get a lovely little apartment at Willow Creek and not have a care in the world. I played my part, picking up the legal agreement and squinting at the pages through my reading glasses. "It's all so confusing," I murmured, letting my hand tremble slightly as I adjusted the frames on my nose. "All these legal words. David used to handle everything." I looked up at Leo, a carefully crafted look of bewildered trust in my eyes. He flinched, his gaze darting away. "I just need a little time," I continued, my voice barely a whisper. "I have an old friend from my book club, Eleanor. Her husband was a paralegal for 40 years. I'd feel better if he just looked it over for me, just to make sure it's all right." Leo's relief was palpable. He practically sagged against the back of his chair. "Of course, Mom. That's a great idea. Take all the time you need." Isabella, however, was impatient. I could see the flicker of annoyance in her eyes. But she saw victory so close she could taste it, so she agreed with a tight, brittle smile. "Whatever makes you comfortable, Gladys." She had already moved on to the spoils of war. The house felt violated by their presence, the air still thick with her cheap, overpowering perfume long after their Mercedes had sped away. The quiet that descended was not peaceful. It was heavy with my simmering rage. That evening, scrolling through my phone while a pot of tea steeped on the stove, I saw her Instagram post. It was a picture of my house taken from the street with a dreamy, oversaturated filter applied. The caption read, "Project Phoenix, turning this dusty old relic into a palace fit for a queen. Can't wait to show you all the before and afters. Warsh renovation Travtion Pasadena, dreaming, Orsino, out with the old." Below it, a short video clip showed her walking through my living room, pointing her phone at the redwood wall. "This is so coming down," she announced to her followers. Her overconfidence was my greatest weapon. She called me the next day, her voice bright and sickeningly cheerful. "Gladys, we've decided to have a little housewarming party next Saturday to celebrate our new chapter. It's really more of a networking thing for Leo and me, you understand. We'll just be clearing out some of the old junk to make room for the caterers." She paused, then delivered the final condescending blow. "You really don't need to come. It will be a lot of young people, loud music. You wouldn't be comfortable." "I understand," I said softly, my voice a perfect imitation of meek acceptance, and hung up. The cold fury inside me was a perfect, quiet flame. My phone rang again almost immediately. This time, it was Benjamin Carter. "Gladys, we have a buyer," he said, his voice crisp and professional, devoid of any emotion. "A design conglomerate from Switzerland. They understand the home's legacy. They're offering $5.2 million, cash. The contract will be ready to sign this Friday." The pen felt heavy in my hand as I signed the sales contract, its fine-tipped nib scratching softly against the thick, expensive paper. This wasn't the end of a chapter. It was the closing of an entire book and the preparation for writing a new one. My signature, shaky but resolute, looked nothing like David's confident, artistic scrawl on the original blueprints, but I knew, in this moment, it carried the same weight of purpose. It was Friday morning, October 10th, 2025. I sat in the quiet, sunlit conference room of Benjamin Carter's office. The air smelled of old leather and new money, a world away from the dust and disappointments of the past week. Across the vast polished mahogany table, a man in an impeccably tailored suit, Monsieur Dubois, the representative from the Swiss firm, nodded with a look of profound respect. He had arrived an hour earlier, not with the aggressive posture of a businessman, but with the quiet reverence of a curator. "It is not a house, Madame Miller," he had said, his voice a low, cultured murmur that was a balm on the raw wound Isabella had inflicted. "It is a living piece of art. The way Vance used the light, the seamless flow between the interior and the California landscape, it is poetry. We are not its owners, merely its new custodians." "We are deeply honored." His words were a gift. They saw what David had created, what I had cherished. They understood. Benjamin slid the final page of the multi-page contract toward me. I took a deep breath, the scent of lemon polish and distant traffic filling my lungs, and signed my name. As my pen lifted from the paper, a single tear escaped and traced a path down my cheek, a quiet goodbye to the life I had known, to the walls that held the echoes of David's laughter and the bitter ghosts of my son's betrayal. I thought of Leo's height marks, still faintly visible on the kitchen door frame. I thought of the scent of sawdust from David's workshop, but there was no regret. As I let go of the house, I was taking back my life. Monsieur Dubois gathered his copies of the contract, stood and bowed slightly. A gesture of old-world courtesy that felt like it belonged to another era. "We will be worthy of its legacy," he promised, before he was quietly shown out of the room, leaving just me and Benjamin. "It's done," Benjamin said, his voice gentle. He began placing documents into a crisp new folder for me, his movements efficient and precise. "Here is your copy of the contract and the escrow details. The funds will be fully transferred within 72 hours. He then slid one final single sheet of paper across the desk. It was the official, legally binding 30-day notice to vacate, addressed to Mr. Leo Miller and Mrs. Isabella Reynolds. "Everything is ready for tomorrow night's performance," he said, a glint of steel in his eyes that I was beginning to recognize. He then reached into his jacket and placed a sleek, black credit card on the desk in front of me. It had no numbers, just my name, Gladys Miller, embossed in elegant silver. "This is a temporary card linked directly to the advance from the sale," he explained. "The limit is substantial. I thought you might need a new outfit for the party." I picked it up. It felt cool and solid, a tangible piece of my new reality. I thought of the years I had spent carefully clipping coupons, of the simple dresses bought on clearance racks. I tucked the powerful little piece of plastic into my worn purse, the stark contrast between the old scuffed leather and the new limitless potential, a perfect symbol of the woman I was becoming. When I left his office, I didn't turn my old sedan toward Pasadena. I didn't go back to the house that was no longer mine. I drove west, toward the sun and the sea, until the high rises of Beverly Hills surrounded me, gleaming like promises. I parked in front of a real estate office with a window display of sprawling mansions and oceanfront properties. I walked in, my back straight, my head held high, and approached the first agent I saw, a polished young woman with a professionally bright smile that faltered for a split second as she took in my simple cardigan and sensible shoes. "I'd like to see a penthouse," I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through her practiced greeting. "The one with the best view." Standing in the vast, empty penthouse on the 52nd floor, with the glittering carpet of Los Angeles spread out beneath me, I felt the true meaning of the word freedom for the first time. The air here was different, thin and clean, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere of my own home whenever Isabella was in it. Down there, in Pasadena, the walls had begun to feel like they were closing in. Each visit from her and Leo, another turn of the screw, tightening the pressure until I could barely breathe. Up here, there were no walls, only glass and sky, and a horizon that stretched on forever. I walked through the echoing space, my footsteps soft on the polished concrete floors. The real estate agent had arranged a temporary lease in this furnished display unit while I decided what came next. It was a space designed to impress, filled with minimalist Italian furniture, abstract art, and an air of untouchable elegance. It already felt more like home than the house I had just left. I thought of David, of the quiet, honest life we had built with our own hands. He would have been appalled by what Leo had become, by the weakness and the greed, but he would have been proud of the fight I was putting up. I wasn't just protecting a house, I was protecting our memory, our shared legacy, from being trampled under the stilettos of their ambition. In that moment, staring out at the endless city, I felt a deep sense of peace. David's legacy was safe. Morbid curiosity, a powerful and undeniable urge, got the better of me. I pulled out my phone and opened Instagram. Isabella's profile was public, a glittering stage for her vanity. Her latest story was a flurry of chaotic activity. Short, jerky videos showed my Pasadena home swarming with strangers. Caterers were setting up buffet tables on the lawn David had so carefully tended. Florists were wrestling large, ostentatious arrangements of white lilies, a flower I despised, through the front door. A DJ was testing a sound system on the deck, the thumping bass making my phone speaker vibrate with a sound of violation. Isabella was in the center of it all, a queen directing her court. She moved through the rooms with a proprietary air, pointing, commanding, her voice a shrill instruction over the noise. The final clip was a slow, arrogant pan of the decorated living room. My comfortable, worn armchair had been shoved into a corner, replaced by a sleek white rental sofa. A caption in bold pink letters was scrawled across the screen, turning this filthy dump into a palace. New beginnings. I felt nothing. No anger, no pain, just the cold, clear focus of a general watching the enemy march headlong into a perfectly laid trap. A text message pinged at the top of my screen, a clean, sharp sound in the quiet penthouse. It was from Benjamin. Our representative is confirmed. Monsieur Dubois is a professional. I will meet you at 8 p.m. tomorrow. I closed the app and set my phone down on the stark white marble of the kitchen island. A single bottle of wine sat there, a welcome gift from the real estate agent. It was a Chateau Margaux, a 1996. A wine I knew David had always dreamed of trying but had always considered an impossible extravagance. I found a corkscrew in my purse, the simple waiter's tool feeling rough and honest in my hand. I opened the bottle with a soft pop that seemed to be the only sound in the world. I poured a glass. Walking back to the floor-to-ceiling window, I raised it to the city lights, a silent toast to the man who had given me the tools for this battle. To you, David, I whispered, and to a new beginning. As I took the first sip, the wine like velvet and history on my tongue, my phone rang, its jarring ringtone and intrusion. The screen glowed with Leo's name. I let it ring once, twice, a small test of my own resolve. Finally, I answered. Mom, you sure you don't want to come tomorrow? Isabella said it would be great if you were here. His voice was hollow, laced with a false, practiced cheerfulness that turned my stomach. Thank you, dear, I replied, my voice perfectly calm, as smooth as the wine in my glass. I'll think about it. The thumping bass of the music reached me from down the street, a boisterous obituary for a family that had died long ago. It was Saturday, October 11th, 2025. I had the taxi drop me at the corner and walked the final block, a silent observer approaching my own home. The street was lined with expensive, unfamiliar cars. Through the large glass walls of the living room, I could see a sea of bright, fashionable people, their loud chatter and sharp laughter, a desecration of the quiet sanctuary David had built. This was a far cry from the quiet dinners we used to host, and an even crueler echo of the night I was first made to feel like a stranger here. From my vantage point in the shadows of my neighbor's overgrown ficus tree, I had a perfect, heartbreaking view into the heart of the party. Isabella was in her element, a queen holding court. Holding a champagne flute like a scepter, she led a small group of her friends on a tour of their future conquest. "This whole wall of dark, depressing wood," she announced, waving a dismissive hand at the hand-planed redwood paneling that had taken David months to perfect. "It's coming down, of course. We're opening it all up for a much better flow." Her friends nodded in sycophantic agreement, their eyes as vacant as their praise. "And this fireplace," she gestured to the massive stone hearth that was the heart of the home, "is just so rustic. I'm thinking something much sleeker. White marble, perhaps." I watched as she moved through the rooms, pointing out flaws that didn't exist, her voice a poisoned dart aimed at every memory, every piece of David's soul embedded in the house. And Leo was a shadow moving through the crowd, his smile as thin as a wire. He refilled glasses and nodded at conversations, a gracious host playing a part in a play that was destroying him. I saw one of his old college friends clap him on the shoulder. "Hey man, this is wild. Your mom's okay with all this?" Leo's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "My mother, she needs her rest," he mumbled, turning away to grab another bottle of wine from the bar they'd set up on my dining table. He was a coward, but seeing his misery, I felt a pang of the old love, a deep and aching sorrow for the boy he had been. Later, Isabella gathered everyone in the living room. Her voice cut through the din. "I just want to thank you all for coming to celebrate our vision," she declared, beaming. "Leo and I are so excited to begin this project, to finally bring this house into the 21st century and give it the good taste it's been crying out for." Her friends cheered, raising their glasses to her audacity. After a few more glasses of champagne had been poured, she climbed onto the low stone ledge of the fireplace, demanding everyone's attention for a toast. The music softened. "A toast," she began, raising her glass high, her silhouette framed by the fire David had laid so many times. "To new beginnings, and a special thank you to my mother-in-law for finally realizing that this place needed a younger hand to make it something worthwhile." As the polite, drunken applause began to ripple through the room, the heavy oak front door swung open. The music sputtered and died into an abrupt, shocking silence. Every head in the room turned. There I stood, in an elegant silk dress the color of midnight, flanked by two men in dark, impeccably tailored suits. "I think you're using the phrase 'our house' a little prematurely, Isabella." My voice cut through the stunned silence, clear and sharp as shattered glass. For a split second, as I stood in the doorway seeing Leo's panicked face, my heart clenched. The instinct to protect him, to smooth everything over, was a physical pull, a maternal reflex honed over 35 years. But then my gaze found Isabella still perched on the fireplace ledge, her expression of shock already hardening into one of pure, unadulterated fury. The memory of her sneer, her casual cruelty in this very room, solidified my resolve like ice. I thought of every insult, every condescending glance, every time she had made me feel worthless. Tonight, the roles were reversed. Isabella stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. She tried to laugh, a high, brittle sound that broke in the tense air. "Mother, what a dramatic entrance. You're late to your own, well, to the party." She was trying to reclaim control, to paint me as a senile old woman seeking attention in front of her important friends. A slow, deliberate smile touched my lips. "I came to the farewell party," I said, my gaze sweeping over the crowd of shocked, curious faces before landing back on her. "After all, it is my house." I let that sink in, at least for a few more minutes. I took a step to the side, gesturing to the two men who had entered with me. They were a study in contrasts. Benjamin, with his American legal gravitas, and Monsieur Dubois, with a quiet European elegance. Their presence radiated an unassailable authority that made the festive decorations look cheap and foolish. "I don't believe you've been properly introduced," I continued. "This is Mr. Benjamin Carter, my attorney." Benjamin gave a curt, professional nod, his eyes sweeping the room with cold assessment. "And this is Monsieur Dubois, who represents the people who have just purchased this property." A wave of confused murmurs rippled through the guests. They shifted on their feet, their festive mood evaporating into a thick, palpable tension. Smartphones, which had been put away, began to emerge from pockets and purses, their small blue lights glowing in the dim room like fireflies gathering to watch a car crash. Leo, who had been frozen by the fireplace, a statue of guilt, finally found his feet and stumbled forward. "Mom, I don't understand," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Purchased? What are you talking about? This is some kind of joke, right?" My eyes left my son and settled on Isabella. She was now visibly trembling. Her knuckles white where she gripped the edge of the stone ledge, her face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. "Your wife was right," I said, my voice steady and unforgiving. "This house needed a new owner who would truly appreciate it, someone who understands its value beyond a place to throw a party and tear down walls." I let the words hang in the air for a perfect, agonizing beat, watching the last bit of color drain from her face before delivering the final blow. "So, I sold it." The collective gasp that swept the room was a physical thing, a sudden intake of breath that sucked the very air from the space. A woman in a sequined dress actually put a hand to her chest. "For $5.2 million. The sound of a glass shattering echoed as Isabella's champagne flute slipped from her nerveless fingers and exploded on the slate floor, a glittering spray of crystal and expensive wine. You're lying," she shrieked, her voice cracking, ugly with desperation and disbelief. "It's not possible. The appraisal, it's only worth $450,000. I looked at her, the woman who had called my home a dump, and my smile turned cold as ice. "That, my dear, is what happens when you ask the wrong people. $450,000. Benjamin Carter repeated, his voice as cold and hard as polished granite, cutting through the stunned silence. He was looking directly at Isabella, who was still frozen on the fireplace ledge. "That was the number provided by an unlicensed appraiser after receiving a rather generous consulting fee from you, was it not, Miss Reynolds?" He used her maiden name, and the deliberate sting of it silenced the last of the whispers. The guests, who had been a murmur of shocked speculation, had pulled back, forming a silent, judgmental circle. They turned my living room into an arena, and Isabella was the gladiator who had just been disarmed. Isabella's face, a moment ago flushed with champagne and triumph, was now a ghastly, mottled white. She looked at Leo, a desperate, silent plea for him to do something, say something. But my son was staring at the floor, his shoulders slumped in defeat, as if he could will the very ground to swallow him whole. Benjamin didn't wait for her answer. He opened his folder and produced a thick, professionally bound document, its cover embossed with the logo of a world-renowned auction house. This, on the other hand, is a certified appraisal conducted last week by Sotheby's International Realty. This house, which you so eloquently called a dump, is in fact the only residential commission ever completed by the master architect Arthur Vance after his seclusion in 1968. It is known in certain circles as the Vance Sanctum. From the back of the crowd, a man in a velvet jacket, I vaguely recognized him as Julian Croft, a prominent art critic Isabella had been desperate to impress, whispered audibly, "My God, the Vance Sanctum, I thought it was just a myth." His words of validation rippled through the guests, turning their curious stares on Isabella into open expressions of contempt. She was not just a bully. She was an ignorant one. Furthermore, Benjamin continued, his voice relentless as he produced a small receipt, we have a record of a $5,000 cash payment made to this appraiser from your personal account 2 days before he submitted his fraudulent valuation. The district attorney's office often finds such things very interesting. This was my moment. The legalities had been laid bare. Now it was time for the heart. This house isn't about money, I said, my voice quiet but carrying with an unexpected strength through the silent room. It's about the love my husband poured into every beam and every stone. It was his sanctuary, our sanctuary. I looked around the room, at the redwood walls she had called depressing, at the hearth she had called rustic. He built it as a testament to quiet beauty and honest materials. He believed a home should be a refuge, not a stage, and you wanted to tear it down for a white marble fireplace. The vulgarity of her plan hung in the air, exposed and cheap. Monsieur Dubois, who had remained a silent, imposing figure until now, finally spoke, his voice adding a foreign, final authority to the proceedings. Our firm is honored to preserve the legacy of Arthur Vance, he said, his French accent making the words sound like a final judgment. All plans for renovation are, of course, canceled. The finality of his statement seemed to finally break through Leo's catatonic stupor. He looked around the room, at the scornful faces of his wife's friends, at the ruins of his marriage, at me, and his voice was the broken cry of a lost child. But where will we live? I looked at my son. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt not anger, but a profound aching pity. That, I said softly, is a question you two should ask each other, but not here. Benjamin Carter opened his briefcase and took out a final single sheet of paper. And now, he said, his voice cutting through the leaden silence, for the last piece of business this evening. The legal document in his hand was the true weapon, the final, unavoidable truth in a night that had been built on a foundation of lies. The guests, who had been a murmur of shocked whispers, fell completely silent, their champagne flutes frozen halfway to their lips. A forest of smartphones had risen, their small blue lights glowing in the dim room like a digital jury, all pointed at Isabella, ready to record her downfall for posterity. Isabella stared at the paper as if it were a snake, her body coiled with a tension that was about to snap. Leo looked catatonic, his body swaying slightly where he stood, a man hollowed out by his own choices. Benjamin, ignoring them both, began to read in a clear, dispassionate tone that offered no room for argument or appeal. The legal language sounded foreign and brutal in the festive space. Pursuant to the laws of the state of California, this document serves as a formal notice to vacate. Mr. Leo Miller and Mrs. Isabella Reynolds are hereby required to remove all personal belongings and relinquish the premises located at 155 Canyon Drive, Pasadena, within 30 days of this date, October 11th, 2025. He stepped forward and held the paper out, not to Isabella, the architect of this disaster, but to my son. Leo's hand was shaking so violently he could barely take it. As his fingers closed around the notice, a primal sound of rage and disbelief tore from Isabella's throat. She lunged for the paper, her perfectly manicured nails transformed into claws, trying to rip it from Leo's grasp. "This is illegal! This is harassment! We'll sue you! We'll sue all of you!" Her voice was a shrill, ugly thing, all pretense of sophistication gone, revealing the raw panic beneath. Benjamin didn't even flinch. He looked at her with an expression of mild, professional boredom that was more insulting than any shout. "Good luck with that," he said calmly. "The new owners, a multinational corporation with headquarters in Zurich, have a legal department larger than your father's entire company. They do not lose." He paused, letting the weight of that sink in. And, incidentally, upon reviewing the fraudulent appraisal and other documents your husband left behind, they are also considering filing a criminal complaint against you for attempted fraud. The threat of criminal charges finally broke her. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a wild, cornered panic. She spun around, her face twisted with a rage born of pure humiliation, and glared at the silent, watching crowd of her own friends. "What are you all looking at?" she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. "The show's over. Get out of my house." The irony of her words, spoken in a house that was no longer hers, was lost on no one. Her party had officially become a public spectacle of her own ruin. The guests, who had come for free champagne and a glimpse of an imagined glamorous life, began to awkwardly file out, a clumsy, hasty retreat of people eager to escape the toxic fallout and gossip about it in their cars. The room emptied until it was just the three of us left in the wreckage of their ambition, surrounded by half-eaten canapes and the stench of failure. The silence was absolute, broken only by Isabella's ragged, choked sobs. Then, with a dull, final thud of knees hitting stone, Leo sank to the floor in front of me, the eviction notice still clutched in his hand like a death warrant. "Mom!" he sobbed, his face buried in his hands, his whole body shaking with a grief that had come far too late. "Please, Mom, please." I looked down at the son I had raised, the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, the man whose betrayals I had just exposed, and I felt nothing but a vast, cold emptiness where my love for him used to be. I simply shook my head. "It's too late, Leo." I turned my back on him and walked away. I left that house for the last time, and I did not look back. Behind me wasn't just a ruined party, with its spilled champagne and scattered canapes, but the ashes of a family I had once loved. I could still hear the faint, wretched sound of Leo's sobbing from the floor where I had left him, a sound that tried to pull at the old maternal strings in my heart, but the strings had been cut. I walked down the stone path David and I had laid together, my heels clicking with a finality that felt both brutal and liberating. Benjamin was waiting by his car, the passenger door held open. The cool night air of October 11th felt clean against my tear-stained cheeks. I took one deep breath, not of the familiar scent of night-blooming jasmine from my garden, but of the crisp, neutral air of a new beginning. As I slid into the cool leather of the passenger seat, I made a conscious choice not to spare a final glance for the house or for the broken figure of my son still kneeling inside. That part of my life was over. We drove in silence for a long time, the quiet, manicured streets of Pasadena giving way to the bright, indifferent freeways of Los Angeles. The city lights blurred into streaks of red and white outside the window, a river of strangers moving toward their own lives, their own dramas, completely unaware of the one that had just imploded in a quiet canyon. "The initial wire transfer has been confirmed, Gladys," Benjamin said softly, his voice a steady presence in the dark cabin of the car. "The funds are secured in your new account." He paused for a moment, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. "How are you feeling?" I watched the distant skyscrapers grow closer, a constellation of man-made stars. "I feel free," I said, and the truth of the words surprised me with its simple, unadorned power, and terribly sad. I turned my head to look at my own reflection in the dark glass. I think I finally lost my son tonight. Not just the man he became, but the boy he was. I spent 35 years sacrificing, clipping coupons so he could have the best sneakers, mending my own clothes so he could have a new coat, giving up vacations so he could go to summer camp. I thought I was building a foundation of love. I see now I was just building his sense of entitlement. My voice was quiet, contemplative, not angry. The anger had burned itself out back at the party, leaving this strange, clear-eyed sorrow in its place. He wasn't the only one I lost, I continued, more to myself than to him. I lost the woman who believed her son could do no wrong. I lost the wife who thought her husband's legacy was safe in the hands of his child. I did what I had to do, Benjamin, for me and for David. He never would have stood for what they did. He would never have tolerated their disrespect. The car pulled into the subterranean garage of a sleek high-rise in the heart of the city. A uniformed doorman greeted us and led us to a private elevator that whisked us upwards in a smooth, silent ascent. When the doors opened directly into the penthouse, I stepped out into a vast, empty space. The walls were all glass, and the city spread out below like a carpet of diamonds. There was no furniture, only the echo of my own footsteps on the polished floor and the endless, glittering view. I walked straight to the window, the city lights reflecting in my eyes, and placed my hand on the cool, solid glass. A single tear traced a path down my cheek, but it wasn't a tear of sadness for what I had lost. It was a tear of profound, shattering relief for what I had just reclaimed, myself. In the silence, a sharp buzz cut through the air, a jarring, modern sound. My phone, lying on a marble countertop nearby, had lit up. I walked over and picked it up. It was a news notification from an online outlet, the kind that promised local gossip and scandal. The headline seemed to scream from the small screen. Scandal at Pasadena party. Socialite heir evicted by secret millionaire mother-in-law. The story had already begun. The first dawn in my penthouse was the color of hope. There was no oppressive silence from a guilty son, no shrill complaints from an entitled daughter-in-law. There was only the distant, gentle hum of a city waking up and a future that was entirely my own. In the weeks that followed, I shed the skin of my old life, the one lived in service of their comfort. My simple, frugal existence gave way to quiet exploration. I spent my days rediscovering the woman I had been before I became a solution to their problems. I enrolled in a pottery class, feeling the cool, wet clay spin beneath my hands, creating something beautiful from a formless lump, a metaphor not lost on me. I bought furniture that was not just functional, but artful, pieces that David would have admired. I was living a life I had long since packed away. One afternoon, my phone rang. It was Carol, an old friend I hadn't spoken to in months. "Gladys, I have to tell you," she said, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "I heard from Susan, who knows Isabella's cousin. Isabella packed her bags last week. The social humiliation was too much for her to bear. And Leo, his company has an image to protect. The story from the party made its way to his boss. They let him go. He's staying on a friend's couch." A part of me, the mother part that never truly dies, ached, not for the man who stood by and let me be humiliated, but for the boy he once was. Yet there was no regret. This was the hard, sharp lesson he had to learn entirely on his own, a lesson my love and money had always shielded him from. A few days later, on a whim, I decided to have lunch alone at an elegant restaurant in Beverly Hills. As I savored my meal, a quiet celebration of my own resilience, I saw them across the room, Richard and Margaret Reynolds, Isabella's parents. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. I saw Margaret freeze, her fork halfway to her mouth, a look of pure, mortified shame on her face. Richard quickly turned away, his face a blotchy, furious red. They, who had once looked down on me in my own home, could not even meet my gaze in public. It was a small, silent victory. I finished my lunch, feeling a serenity that was still new and precious. As I was signing the bill, the waiter approached my table, holding a small, folded piece of paper on a silver tray. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said discreetly. "A gentleman asked me to give this to you." The handwriting, once so familiar it hurt, now looked like a message from a stranger. It read simply, "Mom, can we talk?" I stared at the note in my hand. Leo's handwriting, once a familiar comfort, now looked like the script of a stranger. After a long, sleepless night, I sent a simple text, "Tomorrow, 10 a.m., the Bluebird Cafe on 3rd. It was neutral ground, a place with no memories, no ghosts. The cafe was a quiet, clean space, smelling of roasted coffee and polished wood. I was there first, choosing a small table in the corner. When Leo walked in on October 15th, 2025, a jolt of shock went through me. He was a ghost. The tailored suits were gone, replaced by a cheap, rumpled shirt. His face was gaunt, his eyes shadowed with an exhaustion that went bone deep. He looked older, broken. He slid into the chair opposite me, not meeting my gaze. "Mom," he began, his voice raspy and low, "I don't deserve for you to be here. I needed to say it to your face. I am so sorry." He finally looked up and his eyes were full of a raw, desperate shame. For everything. There's no excuse. I was weak. I was a coward. I let her poison my mind and I stood there while she hurt you. It was unforgivable. He didn't ask for money. He told me what I already knew. Isabella had left him the day after they were served the eviction notice. His job was gone. He had lost everything. "I'm not here for a handout," he said, his voice cracking. "I just want to know if there's any way, any chance. I can start to earn my way back, to prove that I'm not that person anymore." I listened in silence, letting his confession fill the space between us. A flicker of the old maternal instinct, the urge to soothe and forgive, rose in my chest. I crushed it. "Do you have any idea what that night felt like, Leo?" I asked, my voice calm and even. "To have your daughter-in-law call your home a filthy dump in front of a room full of people, to have her threaten you, and to look over and see your only son, the boy you raised, staring at the floor in silence." He flinched as if I had struck him. "I know," he whispered, his head sinking into his hands. "I see it every time I close my eyes. I will live with that shame for the rest of my life." I reached into my purse, but instead of a tissue, I pulled out my checkbook. The sight of it made him recoil. "Mom, no, that's not why—" "I know why you're here," I said, cutting him off as I began to write. I wrote out a small, practical amount, then tore the check from the book with a neat final rip. I pushed it across the table. "This is for 3 months' rent on a modest apartment and a security deposit. This is not forgiveness, Leo. This is one last chance for you to save yourself." I stood up, my chair scraping softly on the floor. He stared at the check, a lifeline he hadn't asked for but desperately needed. "The road ahead is yours to walk alone. Don't call me, don't contact me," I said, my voice leaving no room for negotiation. "Not until you have truly become the man your father always hoped you would be." I turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving him alone with his check, the price of his last chance, and a future he would have to build from the ashes. This morning, the coffee brewing in my new kitchen smelled like freedom, and for the first time in years, it was just for me. I learned the hardest lesson, that protecting your peace and your dignity isn't selfishness. It's a necessary act of self-love. True family is built on respect, not entitlement, and sometimes the only way to save yourself is to be willing to walk away from those who refuse to see your worth. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to draw a hard line to reclaim your own strength?